In a world of dust-filled, auto-tuned, underperforming PCs, one yes man is here to save us all. This is PC House Call. The desktop workstation. This is something that over the last few years for me personally has changed a lot. And the main factor here is that my desktop workstations nowadays are always overclocked. And that's simply because time is just so important to me, or more specifically, time efficiency, where if I'm overclocking my systems and extracting extra performance, that means I'm then saving time in my workflow. And I've recently done this on the 3950X, which is a 16-core, 32-threaded AMD processor, and I've also done that with a 7980XE, and that's an 18-core, 36-thread processor. And so recently I was talking to my good friend Zai, who is also a fellow YouTuber under the banner of Rocket Jump Ninja, and he has an 18-core, 36-threaded 10980XE, which is pretty much the same CPU as the 7980XE that I had, and he wants me to come over and work some tech yes magic to make this desktop or this workstation overclocked. Now, something does need to be said before we get into this vlog today, and that is that overclocking and work generally have never gone together. But I think with the amount of quality gear out there, for instance, if you've got a very good power supply, like a platinum rated power supply that has very low ripple suppression, and say for instance, you've got a very good motherboard with a very stable VRM, then you'll be getting a lot cleaner power to your components, and that will give you generally a lot of a bigger headroom to get more performance out of your gear. Same goes for your DDR4 memory, and also in turn, even your GPU. But since we are working with a workstation, and a lot of the times this is for a lot of people their livelihood, you want to spend more money to get the quality gear. So I feel like this is where those two things come together to make overclocking a viable option. So what we're going to do now is jump in the Tech Yes Mobile, head to Zai's place, and then start seeing what his computer is currently running at, and then apply the overclocks and also stress test them to make sure he is stable. Now, the stability thing is a huge factor, and it's going to be a big focus of today's video, but in the end, when you've got things set up right, you will be saving a lot of time in your workflow. So let's go give that PC some tech yes lovin'. And here we are going through a tuning of this PC right here, X299, and it's an Asus model. Now, basically the different motherboard manufacturers may have some teething pains if you're overclocking, and especially if you see a video like this, where in today's video, I'm tuning Zai's PC on an Asus motherboard, there may be different settings within the actual BIOS itself that have different names, or they appear different on, say, an ASRock motherboard or an MSI motherboard or a Gigabyte motherboard. And so what we did right here, basically we did a bit of a fast track with his overclock. And that's because, of course, I don't have days and days to spend at Zai's house overclocking his machine for him. I've got to do my own work. However, I have had a lot of experience with the 18 core itself, the 10980XE, or subsequently before that, the 7980XE. And that likes to run at around 4.4 to 4.5 gigahertz. I find that is the overclocked sweet spot. Of course, there are people out there that will definitely get these things to 4.8, 4.9. I've even heard people getting these to 5 gigahertz on all 18 cores. However, at these speeds, once you go past 4.4, 4.5, I find that the wattage and the power consumed just really starts to lose control. So that extra 500 megahertz, for example, you are now using a lot more power. And of course, with that extra power comes the increased risk of instability and your PC potentially crashing while you're working. So what we've set up here for Zai is a 4.4 gigahertz overclock at 1.14 volt. We ended up tuning this down to 1.14 volt with a load line calibration of level 6. And it seems to be working stable, and we're running Cinebench. Now, the thing about Cinebench R20 is it's one of the most strenuous tests you can run on your CPU. And in fact, it's so strenuous that even at this 4.4 gigahertz level, we are getting power consumption at around 300 watts. So it is juicing quite a lot of power. And I feel like this is that when you guys see me in cooler reviews, I'll talk about having a cooler that is 280 millimeters versus the 240 mil solutions. And the reason for that is I just feel like they give you that bit of extra cooling on these high-end overclocks and high-end CPUs like the 10980XE. And of course, if you're on the AMD side, if you're going to be using the 16 core and overclocking that, those 280 mils just do that little bit extra in terms of giving you that little bit more. And they don't, of course, cost a whole lot more too. So what Xi has here is the 240 mil Corsair H100i RGB Platinum. And so the temperatures are, even at 4.4 gigahertz, they are reaching 100 degrees. Now these CPUs are okay to go up to 115 degrees, but of course, running your CPU at around 100 degrees, I'm sure a lot of people don't feel comfortable with that. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this thing now and get Xi to go for a test drive in Adobe Premiere Pro, which is the main application that he does with his work. And I wanna see how this feels compared to how it felt before. So Xi, after using that in Adobe Premiere Pro, how do you feel about your PC?
Actually really good. It was way smoother than before. When I was editing 1080p before, no problems. Then when I put the 4K footage in there, it just really slowed down. Now though, it seems like I'm just editing 1080p again. So really, really cool. I'll have to use it more to really determine the performance, but so far, seems amazing. So Tech Yes Lovin' seems to be working.
Well, actually, I was going to comment on the Tech Yes Loving on this PC, that it's only received a phase 1. From here on in, we're going to give it 2 more phases of Tech Yes Loving.
Wow, that's, I mean, 1 phase was all it needed. So I can't imagine what we're going to get after phase 2 and 3.
Okay, so I've just got to ask one more question. Are you and your PC ready for these next 2 phases?
Me personally, I can't handle it. I like to keep things smooth, but that thing's a beast. See what you can do.
Wait, Xi, one more question. Has this changed your life?
Changed my life? I didn't have a life before this.
Tech Yes Loving, each phase sold separately. Get ready for phase 2. So one important thing to do on PCs, in my opinion, is to set the power states so that they are, I guess essentially the PC is ready to go as soon as possible. I mean, we're talking, sometimes nanoseconds and milliseconds and stuff like that, but I always want to make sure my PC is snappy, especially when I'm doing a lot of actions per minute. So you'll notice here that it's the CPU is bouncing around from 4.4 gigahertz to 1200 megahertz or 1.2 gigahertz. That's the lowest state that the X299 CPUs will go to, is this 1200 megahertz state here. But this is essentially known as C1E, or enhanced halt state, where it immediately goes down to these levels to save power quickly if the CPU is not being utilized. I love C1E enhanced halt states. I recommend everyone use them, otherwise your CPU can potentially just be chewing up power all the time. So in the BIOS, I go to this setting and I actually disable the C states below that. So C3 and C6, for example. There may, if you're on a laptop, I believe you can go as low as like C7 or C8. So they can get lower and lower in power consumption. But of course, when it comes to work, you want your CPU ready to go. So going from C1 to C0, that's your normal state, you want that to be quick and fast. But at the same time, you still want to utilize the power savings. So the biggest difference is those 2 states, going from C0 to C1. And that's what we want to take advantage of here. We can see it just working in action, and it's just magic when it is working. So we've got our, for instance, when we're using up 300 watts on the Cinebench R20, we're now using up around 70 watts while we're in this state. So that's actually really good. We've tuned this to a level where on idle, this system is using up, I guess, ideal power consumption for what it is. And another thing is we're doing in Windows is we're going to go into power settings in Windows itself. I like to leave my computer on high performance mode, and I like to turn off all the additional settings like USB selective suspend, all these settings that could potentially encumber you if you come into an app or a program that works in where it wants to utilize your USB all the time. I don't know if you've been in Premiere Pro before and you've been using a USB mic and you're like, hey, why does this USB mic not work? That can be because of USB selective suspend. If you're a streamer, I would recommend turning this setting off as well in the power options. Another thing is you can do is on high performance mode is disable the sleep. So if you're going AFK for a little bit of time, you come back, your CPU doesn't have to wake up again. Now, of course, the disadvantages to this is more power consumption, but I guess if this is your life and this is your workstation and this is what you do for a living, you want to save time. And I think that's the most important thing, is how much is your time worth? So for me, it is worth quite a bit, and time is very valuable. So I like to make sure I'm saving this, and if people recommend that I tune up their workstations, I'm going to be applying the same philosophy and principles that I apply to my own workstation. But another thing I will mention about Xi in particular is he's using 8 DIMMs with 128 gigabytes of memory. Now, surprising, this 10980XE has 3600 megahertz on all these 8 DIMMs on 128 gigabytes, which means that the IMC on this CPU is very strong. So I think Xi is lucky here to be able to run 3600 megahertz across 8 DIMMs on this CPU. So very good IMC. The memory works absolutely phenomenally well. So that's going to give him a slight performance bump over just running 4 DIMMs too.
The final phase of Tech Yes Loving is here.
We've installed Unigine Heaven and we're also running MSI Afterburner here, and we've pulled up this right here. This is the frequency curve to the voltage. So what this will do is we can edit the curve here and make it so that this card runs at 1800 megahertz. And this is the sweet spot that I found. I copy pasted this off. I actually tested a lot of different frequencies too, but I copy pasted this from another YouTuber. I'll put their link in the description below. But this works extremely well where you just grab this curve right here and you hold down Shift on your keyboard. Then you can just drag it down to 18. So you want to make sure this top point is up to, it's around 800. I find 1812 megahertz is like where this card likes to go. Although I'm on this, I'm not on my usual mouse, so it's hard for me to get 8. No, I'm just going to leave it at 814. So now with the voltages right here, we're going to zoom into that. And the good thing, this is why another reason I like Heaven. I know a lot of people say, oh, why do you use Unigine Heaven? There's much more strenuous benchmarks out there. The reason I use Heaven is back to that time saving. It's super quick to load up. You can max the settings on 8-speed MSAA, you can put it on ultra quality, and you're still going to be using, you can see the power there. There's still juicing the card to near 100% on the graphics card. So this is a really good benchmark for quickly overclocking and finding and homing in on your where your GPU should be if you're overclocking, or in this case undervolting. So Unigine Heaven's great in that regard. You can just do stuff on the fly, live changes, and it's going to work extremely well. But back to this right here. So we've dragged our curve down. We can see the original line right here, and we've dragged that down to 1800 megahertz. Now the easiest way to do this, and because I don't, again, because I'm over at Xi's house, I don't have time to really check his PC for him 24/7. So I'm going to bump it above what I would usually bump it. You can get this down to around 800 millivolt, 806, but I'm going to give it a little bit more just to be on the safe side, right? So we're going to go with maybe 840 or 837. And we're going to drag that all the way up to 1814 megahertz. And we're going to go back to this little tick right here in MSI Afterburner. We're going to go back to this tick after we've done that, and just left click that. And if we look here, that's going to now bring our maximum curve to 1800 megahertz. And we're going to be running at 800 millivolts, or just a little bit over. So the beauty of this now is if we look at this power consumption right here, we can see automatically the green bar has just gone down so much. That is your difference between these two profiles. And we can even see, I believe the temperatures have even dropped substantially as well. So that's the benefit of undervolting. Now the FPS is not going to drop anywhere near the amount that these two settings have dropped, your temperatures and your power consumption. So there's the magic of undervolting with the RTX 3000 series. So if you do this on the 3080 and also the 3090, you're gonna be seeing some really good results. Now, of course, I've upped it over what I would usually do that because I don't want to be coming back to Zai's house and going, yes, change this, change that. I just want him to have a good experience from the get-go. However, that being said, I'm gonna tell Zai, look, keep an eye out for any crashes or anything that wouldn't usually happen when you're using this PC beforehand, and I'll tell you what voltages you can up, which is mainly 2 voltages, right? We can up this right here, or we can up the CPU core voltage in the BIOS itself. We can maybe take that to 1.16 if it starts crashing, or if the GPU starts crashing, we can take that to 850 millivolt. But he should be okay. I've locked in what I feel is pretty good settings here. Zai should be good to go with his PC. And Zai, how are you feeling about this?
I'm feeling good, Ryan. Feeling good.
So he's feeling good, but the most important thing is the PC feeling good?
Don't know, Brian. Don't know.
And now we're at conclusion time after, I'd say about 2 hours, maybe 3, because I wanted to take Zai we're at the Rock Jump Ninja studio here, and I wanted to take him through all the settings and what I'm doing. So part of overclocking and changing these settings is understanding what we're doing in the process, and that's an important thing. So if something wrong happens, you can then trace back the steps you've taken and make things stable again. Because what we saw there beforehand was the initial reaction of before and after, and that was what I was hoping for. It works a lot better reaction. And so going forward, we've given him this snappy system that just is so responsive. And that's part of, I do this to all my systems, by the way. Like benchmarking systems get the same treatment, everything. Main rigs, benchmark systems, because I always believe in getting the best performance out of what you've got. And that applies to used and new products, and they don't get treated differently at all. Another thing I did on Zai's PC is also disable the Spectre and Meltdown updates, which I'm personally not a believer of. And that in turn, I believe, helps up the performance just that little bit more. So there are things you can do on your PC to get the most out of them. And this is important, especially if you're gaming as well, because Zai's going to be tasting better FPS whilst he's gaming too. And this is one of those funny things, because I was thinking about making a dedicated video towards this where people are playing video games and they're asking me these questions of, and especially when I hear someone else has bought a PC from someone else and they ask me for troubleshooting, they say my CPU is getting utilized at say 50 or 60% and my GPU is the same. It's only getting utilized at 50 or 60%. What's going wrong? Why is it bottlenecking essentially? And this in turn has to do with some of these settings where if you don't have the PC set up right, or I guess some of the settings in the BIOS itself don't play nicely with Windows 10, that can cause your CPU not to run at its full state while you're gaming, and that can cause potential issues with FPS. And so I've seen this before on both AMD and Intel systems. It's not really specific to one platform. And so that's why you'll see me go in and just manually set those C states and also turn off on Intel's side things like the secondary speed step technology, where I've seen that affect your gaming FPS before. And on AMD's side, they've got other settings in the BIOS for power control too. So these are important things that I like to have my system just set up in that state of stop and go. And that's it. It's only got 2 states, as we've seen with C0, C1, stop and go, and that's it. Other than that, I'm not interested in any other settings in terms of my PC running. I like to keep things simple, and when I do keep things simple, the results are amazing, and they have been for me personally for years. And I'm finding this now with workstations, overclocking workstations, it's an even better experience in that I'm saving a lot of time, and I want to share these tips with my friends and family and you guys out there in the audience to help your workflow get better in the process too. So hopefully this video is just showing you, besides some of the jokes and a bit of fun we've had in the process, hopefully it showed you how you can look at the different settings in your BIOS and also see how they can affect, and especially in this case, overclocking too, how that can help you save time. Anyhow, guys, with all that out of the way, with all that said and done, if you guys are overclocking your systems and it's a workstation too, then let us know in the comment section below if you've got any additional tips or tricks of your own, or of course, if there's anything else you need help with or clarification on, drop a comment in the comment section below. Everyone around Tech Yes City is those beautiful open minds, and we love sharing that information. Well, at least hope we would like to, just like this question of the day here, which comes from Rocket Jump Ninja 1 second ago, and they ask, would you ever roll your audience? I don't think I ever would. Guys, there's a first for everything. And when I saw this comment yesterday, I just couldn't resist. Though I'll catch you guys in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.